Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Sophie. I'm the assistant programmer at Bertha DocHouse, and I'm really excited to be here to talk with Erika about The Judge, which had just had its UK premiere with us here. How are you doing, Erika?
I'm doing well. How are you? How's the audience?
Good. How are you all? Psych, make a noise so you can hear you there. Excellent. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions and then hand it over to you guys. So to start off with, I just wanted to talk about Kholoud. Like, she's such a remarkable woman. How did you come across her, and how did you get access to make this film?
I was on shooting hiatus with my last film, In Football We Trust, and had received a Rotary Ambassadorial Scholarship to teach film in Israel, Palestine, and continue some of my postgraduate work in Islamic feminism. And one day, a dear friend and colleague invited me to this Islamic reform meeting that was happening in Ramallah, which is essentially the capital of the West Bank. And their issues of raising the marriage age and domestic violence and regulations surrounding polygamy were being addressed. And I was seated at this table full of men in tarbushes, the hats that the judges and chefs wear, as you now know, and very conscious of being one of the only women in the room. And all of a sudden, Judge Kholoud walked in and had this unbelievable presence that really radiated throughout the room. And as I listened to her speak about how Palestine's legal challenges disproportionately affect women, I found myself, it was like a magnet. I was just like thrown into kind of this Kholoud force.
Yeah.
And at the end of this meeting, I had a chance to officially engage with her, and I found out then that she was the first woman judge to be appointed to any of the religious courts in the Middle East, and was really blown away. And she told me a little bit about her story, how she used to be a lawyer representing women who were survivors of domestic violence, and felt like she could best catalyze change by being the first woman judge in the Shari'a courts, to provide not only an opportunity for women to come forward with some of the most intimate details of their life, where it may be taboo otherwise to tell a male judge, and then in addition to have women at the forefront of interpreting and implementing law. And I said, this is amazing, Kholoud, this is really fascinating. She goes, well, what do you do? I said, I'm a filmmaker. And she said, well, come to my courtroom. And the moment that I walked into her courtroom was the moment that I knew this had to be a film. I mean, she's part judge, part attorney, part lawyer, part marital therapist, and she's adjudicating cases that are not so dissimilar to the cases that we have in our family courts in the Western world. So at the end of the day, I said, Judge Kholoud, I think that your experiences can provide a more nuanced understanding of the Shari'a and can really challenge some of the rapidly increasing global Islamophobia and highlight positive changes for women by women in the Middle East, which we typically don't get to hear about. And she said, that's amazing, Erika. I've been looking for someone to come along.
Well, it seems like you have access to really sensitive subject matter, and I'm aware that many instances in the courtroom you're filming people's hands and feet, and I was wondering how your role in filming and telling the story about very sensitive subject matter affected the structure and how you wanted to draw the story out.
Sure. So when people would come in to have their cases seen by Judge Kholoud, I would quickly ask, these are the Shari'a courts, they're very efficient, she's seeing multiple cases a day. I would quickly ask, is it possible to film this case? I'm doing a film about the Sharia law in Palestine and the first woman judge. And a lot of times people said yes, and you've seen some of their cases in the film. And a lot of times people said no. I need to preserve my anonymity. I don't want my family to know I was here. But you can film my hands and feet, or you can record my voice, but make sure to change it later so it doesn't sound like me, or change my name. So we had a lot of interesting challenges in trying to visualize scenes or alter scenes when we didn't have full access to those. And one of those cases was actually the murder, so it was the process of recreating and having people tell it from different perspectives and kind of getting that immersive experience so that we're there in the room with her courtroom employees, and then being able to kind of use Kholoud in that retelling of the story with hands and feet and everything from other people.
Yeah, and I was interested in how the other judge that became appointed at the same time as her, you don't really get to hear from her in the film, and I was wondering what the different aspect to how she responded to the film being made.
We filmed a lot with Judge Esmahan, and actually one of my favorite scenes that we ended up on the cutting room floor was where Judge Esmahan and Judge Kholoud were talking about how the Shari'a needs to modernize to learn to deal with social media. How do you deal with like disagreements or discussions or courting or dating or marriage proposals on social media? And to me that was so fascinating. Ultimately, it was Judge Kholoud's story and Judge Kholoud's journey that was the focus of the film, and we experienced everything through her eyes. So while Judge Esmahan is Kholoud's best friend and definitely, an incredible woman herself, it was not her story.
How does Kholoud feel about the film? Has she seen it?
She loves it. She loves the film. We showed her the film last year before our Toronto International Film Festival premiere, right before we picture locked, and that was the first time she had seen it, on a computer screen essentially, but then seeing it with an audience in Toronto at TIFF was a really beautiful experience for her.
Okay, I think now it's time to take some questions from the audience. So yes, we have a question over there. We're just going to wait for a microphone to come to our audience member.
Oh, hi. Thank you very much for a very enlightening film. One of the worst aspects was this concept of honor killings. Did you have the opportunity to discuss this issue with the women? And if so, did they say how they think they can address this issue?
So honor killings we use the term in quotes in the film because it's not really a defense. The crimes that people try to justify as honor crimes are tried in the criminal courts as murder. So they have no validity within the Sharia courts. It's not something that the Sharia court actually deals with. And it's not so much a problem in general society. It's mostly in rural villages, and it's like I think mostly education about how that's illegal and not sanctioned under Islam is important to dealing with a few of those crimes that happen in rural villages.
Thank you. Do we have another question from the audience? Okay, I'd like to ask a question actually about Sharia law and regarding Kholoud and how do you think she feels about the law? Do you think it's something that she's just that has to work within the system to make it work, or is it something that she upholds and sort of believes in?
When I first started the filming process, I think I came to this from a perspective of it is so difficult to create change within a religious construct. How does one do this? Can one be a feminist at the same time in working through change within a religious construct? And I asked Judge Kholoud one day, I said, do you consider yourself a feminist? She said, yes, absolutely. I said, do you ever feel at odds within working, or do you ever feel like there's complications, or do you ever feel at odds with the Sharia? And she said, absolutely not. The problem is not with the Sharia, it's with the interpretation, or rather the misinterpretation of the Sharia. And it is crucial that we have women at the forefront of interpreting and implementing the law. And that is a global, universal message. We have to have people at the forefront of interpreting and implementing law that reflects the population in which the law is supposed to serve. Otherwise, there will never be justice.
I mean, did you encounter, I found it interesting when you were talking to other people as well about their beliefs about, whether a woman couldn't make that kind of judgment. How did you talk to a lot of people when you were making that film?
Yes, I mean, there could have been a whole film that included street interviews from people about how they feel about women's leadership. And what I found so interesting in the process of conducting those street interviews the conversations that people were having in Palestine on the street were the very same conversations that we were having in the U.S. during the Hillary Clinton campaign. It was like, are women too emotional to have these leadership roles? Are women like fit to have these like decision-making, you know, important decision-making capabilities over like our country's future or the religious future? There's so many parallels.
We have a question, and go back to the audience. Yes, we've got one now. Just going to wait for the microphone.
Could you say a bit about the process of filming in the West Bank, and did you need any special permits, or did you encounter any logistical challenges?
There were so many challenges filming in the West Bank. You never really know if you're going to be able to get to some place on time when you're traveling long distances, and you never really know how long something is going to take because of the checkpoints and pop-up checkpoints. One of the things that was really important to me in making this film is I wanted to show the vibrancy of life in Palestine. I wanted to show the warmth and the beauty of Palestine. And so part of that was putting up a drone. Well, how do you put up a drone in the West Bank when your freedom of mobility is so limited? You can't put up a drone near the wall. You can't put up a drone near settlements. You can't put up a drone near checkpoints, and there are pop-up checkpoints at every time, like every moment. So how do you film? You put up a drone in the middle of an Arab village or in the middle of a city center, and I was fully prepared for people to come running out of their homes wondering what kind of surveillance was going on, because that's the kind of drones people in Palestine would be exposed to. But instead, people came running out of their homes with cake and coffee saying, thank you so much for showing the world a part of Palestine that they've never seen. And that was a really, really profound moment for me.
Thank you. Do we have, yes, we've got another question coming.
Hi, I was wondering who, you mentioned that the issue is those who interpret Sharia law. I was wondering who it is that interpret Sharia law in the West Bank, and are they the same people that appointed Chief Justice Youssef?
I can't speak to everyone's interpretation of the Sharia. You know, there are different levels, right? You have in an individual judge, you have the kind of like appellate judicial courts, then you have the Chief Justice, and then you have the overall law that Palestine is under or another country would be under. And then you have the Islamic school of thought that law is based on. And for example, in Gaza, the interpretation is based on the Maliki Islamic school of thought, but in the West Bank, it's based on the Abu Hanifa Islamic school of thought. So one of the biggest challenges is how do you create uniformity within the law when the law in Palestine itself does not match up, does not equate. So it's really difficult to pinpoint, you know, who is responsible for what interpretation.
I've got another question.
Thank you. What a wonderful film. Thank you. Much of the filming was from within, as it were, the judicial functionalities with the Chief Justice and other judges. There was one prominent woman politician who spoke, but did you get the opportunity to see how the political classes are thinking about feminist issues in relationship to the law?
Will you repeat the question?
Well, what I'm thinking about is a lot of the film was about within the Department of Justice, if I can put it that way. But there are politicians outside of that who may have a view on the women's position in front of the law and whether they bring to bear pressure on the legal, the judges, the professionals and so on within the legal arena. Is that clear?
Yes, I think it's important to note that Palestine has had judges in the civil courts since the 1970s, and the Palestinian feminist movement has been thriving and very strong for over a century and actually really informed a lot of the feminist movement throughout the Western world. Palestine has been kind of at the forefront of social change and a part of the women's movement for a really long time. The religious courts are not a part of the way that the society perceives the civil courts. It's kind of like the last bastion of male domination, so to speak. And it's not so dissimilar from the rabbinic courts in Israel, for example. So while the Palestinian feminist movement is very strong, and while there's very strong women in leadership roles like Hanan Ashrawi, who you see in the film, it didn't necessarily translate to the religious courts.
Do we have another question from the audience? No? Okay. We do have a question.
Hello, yes, thank you for a wonderful film. I enjoyed it very much and learned a lot. Before you introduced the film, you said that you hoped that this showing of this film might counteract the rise of Islamophobia. Could you explain a little bit more about how you hope that might happen? Because I have an awful fear it might confirm people's views rather than the reverse.
I think the Western world does not get the same kind of exposure to women in Islam in leadership roles. Typically we're exposed to Muslim women in a context of war, in the context of abuse, and we don't get to see positive advancements by women, for women, coming from Muslim women inside a community very often. So that was really, really important for me. In the US alone, I can't speak to the UK, anti-Shari'a legislation has been proposed or even passed in so many states. And there's so much misinformation and so much fear about Sharia law and about Islam. And so I think that by breaking down and providing a more nuanced understanding of how Sharia law actually looks and feels and is implemented in Palestine, which is not so dissimilar from a lot of other countries that have Sharia specifically in their family courts, that really helps kind of dispel stereotypes and provide a different window into a life that we never get to see.
Thank you. We have another question from the audience. I was wondering actually if you could talk about the progression from, so it was since 2009, it was the two judges, and then there was her protege that we learned about, Shireen, at the end. How many male judges were appointed in that time, and what's the sort of the rise? Is there like a proportional rise that you're seeing since you've made the film?
I don't know the exact numbers of how many male judges were appointed. It's not a regular appointment process. It's not like every year they go through a new appointment. Sometimes it takes like 2 years, and then in 1 year they'll have 3 judicial exams and appointments. I do know that her appointment has created a ripple effect, not only in Palestine, but through other countries in the Arab and greater Islamic world. You have women who are now calling Judge Kholoud in other countries, asking for her advice and assistance in trying to challenge whatever cultural norms or taboos might exist in becoming the first Sharia judge in respective countries.
How long do you think it is till she's Chief of Justice?
That's a really good question. I have no doubt that she'll get there. A lot of other factors, depending on who is Chief Justice and other political climate issues, may come up along the way. But I have no doubt, maybe in the next 10 years, as she says, we'll see her.
Yeah, cool. I'm pretty sure she's going to make it there. Do we have? I think we've got time for one last question from the audience. So if we don't have any more questions, then I'd be interested to know also what you're working on now, what you're doing next.
I can't speak a lot about it right now, but the next film is called Belly of the Beast, and it's about women who are fighting reproductive injustice in their communities in the U.S.
I'm looking forward to seeing that. I wish I could turn you round to meet the audience. Thank you so much for joining us, and please join me in thanking Erika.
Thank you for having me.